This is the story of our Milne family before they came to the U.S. Early DNA evidence suggests that 4,000 years ago, the Milne patrilineal ancestry originated in Denmark and was brought to Scotland by the Vikings. Some of our very distant cousins sharing this ancient DNA include Alexander Hamilton, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Warren Buffett, and Sting. Our earliest documented Milne ancestors begin in the small Scottish village of Inch in Aberdeenshire. It was here that Alexander Milne and Elizabeth Milne were married in 1820. Milne and Milne? Yes. Elizabeth Milne was born near Corse in Upper Ashuelach in 1792, daughter of George Milne and Jane Fordyce. Alexander Milne was born in Inch in 1794, the son of Robert Milne. These are our earliest verified Milne ancestors. Perhaps Alexander and Elizabeth were related, or maybe not. Alexander had several occupations throughout his life. One document states that he was a servant. This was when he was 22 years old. According to Aunt B. Milne Edge, who was his great-granddaughter, he was a schoolmaster in the Gotham of Inch and had a school for mentally challenged children. Presumably she meant Bottom, near Inch, since this is where the family lived. Another document indicates that he was a crofter. A crofter is a person who occupies and works a small landholding known as a croft. A crofter is usually the tenant of the croft, paying rent to a landlord. Often crofters have a second source of income, so perhaps he had more than one job at a time. Alexander and Elizabeth had 7 children. Their first child, named Robert, was born in uncleanness because this was over 3 years before they married. A few months before the second child was born, they were finally married. Their fourth child was born in Overbottom, just north of Inch, on the 18th of August, 1824. And this was my great-great-grandfather, George Milne. Alexander died before the 1841 census when Elizabeth was living as a widow in Overbottom. She was a crofter and seemingly raised several of her grandchildren. She died in 1877 in Upper Bottom, and her death record indicates that her father, George Milne, was also a crofter. Elizabeth and Alexander's son George left home at an early age, eventually becoming a master blacksmith in the Kirkton of Touch. George Milne married Beatrice Hay in 1852, and the couple soon settled into a home at Woodside of Tillyfor. They had 8 children, including my great-grandfather Robert, who was born in 1861. In 1862, a neighbor and brother of the Milne's landlord, William McCombie, created the first herd book for the breed Aberdeen Angus. Perhaps the Milnes were some of the early samplers of this tasty beef. George and Beatrice moved to Netherton in Cluny by 1881 with their sons, Robert and William. George and Beatrice were buried in the kirkyard in Cluny during the 1890s. Robert left Scotland to follow his namesake Uncle Robert to Michigan. There he married Elizabeth Smith, and they had 3 children, Kenneth B. and Jean, and they lived happily ever after.